Need to happen for the Miami Heat to emerge as title contenders this season? We'll answer that on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members, and the best way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app, and also hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. As we all remember, the Heat were eliminated in the first round last season, prompting questions about whether or not the championship window has closed. The Heat, during this Jimmy Butler era, have been to the finals twice, nearly 3 times. They've been incredibly successful, but it's fair to wonder, with Jimmy turning 35 and some of the talent drain on the roster over the last couple of seasons, if that window for this group has closed. So we thought we can get on here and outline what needs to happen for the Heat to return to title contention this season. David and I both prepared 3 points each. We'll rotate as we go, and by the end of the show, we should have an outline for the Heat season, or at least a successful one. So, David, let's jump right in.
Yeah.
What's the first thing that needs to happen for the Heat to return to title contention this season?
You know, we talked about it at the start of the offseason, which is kind of ironic because here we are at the almost end of it. And we were in that kind of vague space where we had no idea what was going to happen with Jimmy Butler, et cetera. And obviously the offseason has played out the way it has. I expect him to have a fantastic season, and I think he's going to be a great player. But having said that, I had at the start of the offseason kind of envisioned this potential scenario where Bam Adebayo would become the best version of himself, because that's where he's at right now. He's got the confidence of having won a gold medal, his second gold medal with Team USA. He's an all-star again. There's a lot about his game that he's already at a high level, but I think there's even more. And maybe it's just a matter of knocking down the three-point shot. Maybe it's just being more aggressive on offense and looking to take a much more diverse approach to his overall scoring. But if he can play at a high level, almost a top 5 level, I would say a MVP type level, at least being that kind of consideration, then I think that would be enough to propel Miami into title contention, despite whatever holes they might have on their roster, despite whatever concerns you might have about the team's depths, or even whatever concerns might happen regarding Jimmy Butler and his health and et cetera, and availability. I think if Bam is one of the best players in the league, that's enough for this roster to get to title contention.
What does that look like? Like, when you have Bam Adebayo, basically, if I'm hearing you right, like, we need Bam Adebayo to be on MVP ballots. He doesn't necessarily have to win it, but he's got to be on ballots the way that Jalen Brunson was on ballots last year. I don't think anybody necessarily puts Jalen Brunson as one of the top 5 players in the league, but he had one of the best 5 seasons in the league. And I think that's kind of what you're saying here. Even if we don't consider Bam one of the best 5 guys, if he's playing like one of the best 5 guys in the regular season and he's on ballots, that could be enough. But what does that look like for Bam?
27, 10, and 6 per game.
Jesus. I think you're right.
That's a monster leap. That's a big monster leap, but that's kind of what it's expected. Like, I mean,
yeah,
I don't know how realistic it is.
For the record, 10 and 4 essentially last year. So that would be a 6 points and almost doubling, 6 points per game more and almost doubling his assist total.
Yeah, you can knock off one of the assists. It doesn't have to be like, he doesn't have to be that kind of central hub on offense, but he has to be.
I think he does to be on an MVP ballot. He has to be the lead guy on offense. Yeah.
I think, you've also got a team that's not going to be on national TV, and that's where kind of these stories take a life of their own. And, the Knicks were on TV, at least it felt like to me, they were on a lot. And every time they were on TV, it was this kind of gritty, tough it out win where one of the Villanova cats was hitting a shot at the buzzer, and it was the Madison Square Garden and the Mecca, we're back. And it was just this kind of continuing to build narrative. And with Miami not having that kind of luxury and not being in New York City and not being able to kind of generate that intensity or buzz. Like, he has to make the most. He has to have pepper in his season with a couple of game winners, if possible, a couple big shots down the. I mean, some kind of an elite highlight that would make him stand out. And that kind of sounds like it's. Oh, of course, a little cliche, but you have to be able to generate some buzz. Like, when was the last time this team had any buzz? I guess it was the finals run, but even then, it was just kind of
when
taking
Jimmy Butler was playing like Michael
players.
Jordan. I think that's when it was. And I hear
Yes.
you on the national TV games, but like, let's also like, it wasn't just because Jalen Brunson was playing at MSG that he was on MVP ballots. The guy was 5th in the league in scoring last year, shot 48% and 7 assists. At some point, national TV or no national TV, the stats are the stats, right? Like, the production is just the production. It doesn't matter if it happened on the MSG network or if it happened on TNT or ABC on a Sunday. It doesn't really
Maybe.
matter.
Maybe.
Well, I mean, when
I
you
think I
have
would
those
argue
kinds of
that.
stats, when you have those kinds of stats,
Yeah,
it doesn't
maybe.
matter.
Okay.
But I would say, to your point, that's why Bam has to have. If you're saying like 27 points per game, 5 or 6 assists, that's, and plus all the, I'm assuming you're also including like defensive player of the year caliber defense per usual. That's the kind of thing that it doesn't matter if you have 7 national TV games like you do as the Heat or 17 national TV games. The stats are going to be jumping off the page. And yeah, obviously having some of the game winners and things like that, like you had against the Pistons last year, like those highlights obviously help, but those would be otherworldly stats. I have my own Bam Adebayo thing a little bit later that I want to get to. But my other one here is Jimmy Butler. You talked about Bam Adebayo. I'll talk about Jimmy Butler. And I'll be very specific in what it is that Jimmy Butler has to do for the Heat to return to title contention this year. He's got to play at least 65 games, and he's got to be back at 22 points per game, which I don't think is asking for the world. He was at 20 last year. He was at basically 22 the 2 years previous. So just get back to what you had been before 2 and 3 years ago. 65 plus games in the season. He has to be out there. 22 points per game. And I think he needs 15 plus games when he posts a usage rating of 30% or more. And you've heard me harp on this stat a little bit. I've got a little bit of a twist on it, though. I got a little bit of twist on this one. So he had 9 games last year where he had a 30% usage rating or better. The Heat were 8-1 in those games, right? That's awesome. When Jimmy Butler plays like a star, the Miami Heat are a very good basketball team. When he doesn't, they're about average. 2 years ago, not including the playoffs, 19 games. So 10 more than last year. 19 games with a 30% usage rating or better. And I rounded up all like the 29.9s, by the way. But 19 games of 30% or better usage rating. The Heat were 11-8 in those games. Still very good. Pretty good. The year prior to that, so 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever, 14 games, the Heat were 10-4 in those games. So over the past 3 years, the Miami Heat are 29-13 when Jimmy Butler plays like a star player. When he plays like a star player in that he's on the ball, he's setting up his teammates, he's scoring, he's doing what star players are supposed to do. That's a 56-win pace. And I think that is right where the Heat need to be. Obviously, 56 wins, you're not in the play-in tournament. And that was the Heat's killer last year. So, and if you're getting that version of Jimmy Butler, with obviously, I'm not asking for him to play 80 games, 65 plus, 15 games with a 30% usage rating, and just obviously healthy for the playoffs, I think you can get all of that stuff. I'm not asking for the world here. I'm not asking for 27 points per game, 75 games played, and then also be Michael Jordan in the playoffs. Like, I'm not asking for that. You could still get your 20 games off, almost. You could still take the 1 game every week and a half off where you just mentally don't show up. But I need 15 games of you playing like a star so that we can just pencil those in as wins, because that tends to happen when Jimmy Butler plays that way.
It seems like you're not demanding a lot, right? I mean, a return to where he was a couple of seasons ago. You still think that's enough? Like, I mean, obviously a lot of other things have to kind of break right.
Yeah.
Health being, I think, the primary thing. But do you think that's enough if Jimmy plays at that level to carry this team into title contention?
I think in the regular season, yes. And then he has to morph into the Super Saiyan Jimmy Butler that he becomes in the playoffs. Like, that's, and
Right.
that maybe
Yeah,
we
that's
could kind of
ultimately
tie
where it
that
is.
into part of this, but
Yeah.
you got to make it easier on yourself in the regular season. And I just don't think at 35 years old, he can flip the switch that maybe he was able to do before. We saw this last year. He's like, I'm going to flip the switch. Hey, it's time. And it wasn't just the injury. The Heat went like, what, 4-3 after he started saying it's playoff Jimmy time. Like, he wasn't any good. He can't just flip the switch anymore. He has to work his way up to it. He has to at this stage at 35 years old. Let's keep it going though. The narrative 2 years ago is that the Heat proved that the regular season doesn't matter. Last year proved differently. How should the Heat approach this upcoming regular season? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Look, they've got this new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. It filters out all the fluff to show you all the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You get just the tickets you're looking for at the best price guaranteed. That's one of the many things that makes Game Time so convenient. They've got their all-in pricing, so you don't even have to worry about whether or not you're going to be hit with hidden fees or anything like that. You know exactly what the total is going to be up front with no surprise fees at checkout. They've got their great seat views, so you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and their lowest price guarantee, or they'll credit you 110% of the difference. So right now, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's Game Time. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. David, what did you guys talk about on today's episode?
We talked about drama behind the Boston Celtics ownership group and whether or not that's kind of a warning for other teams around the NBA. We also talked about why Lakers fans are so upset. Matt Moore wanted to kind of get into it because I think, they had high expectations for that group in that offseason. They didn't quite meet it, but they're still going to be a fairly good team. And we also talked about the Atlantic Division, and I gave my spicy take that the Philadelphia 76ers will upset the Boston Celtics to reign supreme in the Atlantic.
I think I'm with you there. I think Philadelphia's going to win a bunch of. That's not surprising. Matt's kind of a front runner a little bit in that way, but that's okay. What do the Heat need to do to return to title contention? You had Jimmy Butler, you had Bam Adebayo playing at a Bam VP level. I had Jimmy Butler playing at an All NBA level, which I think is what this would be if he gets back to basically what he was a couple years ago. He was second team All NBA. Get back to that level, the availability, the production, all of that. What's next on your list?
I've got a strong season for Tyler Herro. Not just a strong season, though. He's got to be an all-star. Like the whole debate is this team doesn't have a third star. They went after Dane. They've gone after KD. They've gone after Donovan Mitchell. They've gone after every superstar that's become even close to semi-available. What if Tyler is that player? And what if he can become the best version of himself next season? We don't know. Like I don't know that it's realistic. I don't know that Heat fans can count on that. I don't know. I think there's a large portion of Heat fans that don't care about Tyler Herro anymore, and they wouldn't want him on their team because they'd be happy to trade him for next to nothing. But if somehow Tyler comes into this training camp and he winds up just somehow being at another level, shooting the three with much more comfort and making that, I think, the biggest part of his offensive repertoire, and then continuing to grow where he's not necessarily, he's taking the same leaps that he took last year as a playmaker and as a defender, continues to show out and starts generating legitimate all-star buzz. I think by December, January, like you start to see, Tyler Herro, he's been Miami's best player, let's say in this scenario. I think that's all of a sudden a kind of opening a door that wasn't there for this Miami Heat team. Because again, I think that's what this team wanted. We debated on yesterday's episode as per Zach Lowe, what does coaching staff and what does front office want if they were administered truth serum? Well, I think this team would have wanted Bam and Tyler to take those leaps so that Jimmy could be Jimmy Butler in the playoffs. It just hasn't worked out that way, and that's why they've been a play-in tournament team over the last couple of seasons. So I think if Tyler makes that leap, and if it coincides alongside Bam VP, all the better. But if Tyler continues to grow the way he has, I think I think they are a title contender. I really do. I think that all of a sudden you've got those questions answered. And yeah, ultimately it comes down to, can he do it in the playoffs? But if he could do it in 82 games, that's pretty damn good.
So Tyler Herro was on my list of things, and I think you're right. I think the Heat need a third star. I think it's a fair question to wonder, like, who is Miami's third best player? I still think it's Tyler Herro,
So
but I
do I.
think there's other people coming for that now, potentially. And it's not just Terry Rozier. There could be other guys on this roster who emerge and just say, you know what, I'm the third best player on this team now, and that's it. So in terms of Tyler Herro, though, I think you're right. I think he just needs to shift his game a little bit into more efficient parts of the floor. And this wasn't necessarily on my list of things because we've talked about it so much, but it is absolutely a requirement for the Heat to return to title contention. They got to take better shots. They were so reliant on mid-range shots last year. Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Herro, just so many mid-range shots that they were upside down on the math, and it was going to be impossible, literally impossible. They could have had 5 Michael Jordans at their absolute prime. With the amount of mid-range shots that they were taking last year, it still would not have been an efficient offense. And obviously they don't have 5 prime Michael Jordans on their roster. So they need more threes. And I think that goes hand in hand with what you're talking about with Tyler Herro. We're going to get more from Bam. Bam averaged 1.5 3-pointers per game in the last 20 games of last year. We obviously saw that be a part of his game during the Olympics. I think we're even going to see a little bit more from Jimmy Butler because we obviously saw it a little bit more than 2 per game last year for Jimmy. As he ages, it just makes sense to take less of those hits in the paint, settle for some of those threes a little bit more often. I think that's fine. But Miami last year, obviously way over-indexed, more reliant on mid-range shots than any other team in the league. It was them and Phoenix basically miles away from everybody else. And then you look at the flip side of that, 15th in the league in 3-pointers made per possession, right? So the Boston Celtics were number 1 in the league. The Warriors were number 2. The Mavericks were number 3. The Mavericks and the Celtics were in the finals. And a big part of that was because they hit 3-pointers at a high rate, but they also hit them at a high rate at high volume. And so that's why I use this metric, 3-pointers made per possession. Who is averaging the most made threes every possession, every time they're down on the floor? And the Celtics were just leaps and bounds away, further away than everybody else. And I think if the Heat are going to get back to title contention, they need a math to work for them because they don't have the sheer talent level where that's going to be enough to overcome the math problem, right? And I don't know that there's a team in the league that has the talent level that you need to just overcome the math problem. I think the NBA has just trended in such an analytic way that you need to be winning the math problem every single game. And the Celtics were dominant last year in part because of their talent, but also because of the 5-out offense, because they were taking threes, because they were limiting opponent threes and all those things. They were starting ahead basically every game.
Yeah.
And the Heat, it felt like we're starting from behind, They can make 3 mid-range shots, but the other team is making 3 3-pointers, and now you're down by 6. So they just need to generate more 3-pointers. Tyler Herro, it's going to be a big part of his game, I think, his growth and his evolution, but also Eric Spoelstra is going to have to figure out ways to get this team to buy into taking more threes also.
Yeah, it's a tough one because you see how it breaks out and what who's going to have the possessions and things of that sort, and I don't know. I mean, I saw this, and I know it's not necessarily indicative of anything significant, but like I saw it on social media. Like there was a stat put out by I think an NBA University account on Twitter or X or whatever, and it kind of pointed out that Duncan Robinson has been one of the best 3-point shooters for a good long time now, and somebody was like, why doesn't he take more threes? It's like, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just more playing time. Maybe it's something else. But I mean, just the way this offense has worked, they're slow. They're deliberately slow. They try to work the clock so you can find the best shot possible. And even sometimes it's just this kind of not necessarily a desperation heave, but
Stop looking for the best shot possible.
Yeah.
Just take the 3-pointer. Just take it. Like I want more threes in the first 7 seconds of the shot clock. And you're right, Duncan Robinson, he was usually around 10 or 11 3-pointers attempted per 36 minutes. He was down to 9 last year. You touched on this a couple weeks ago. I thought it was a great point that you made that like part of that was because Tyler Herro was hurt for so long and Kyle Lowry wasn't really a factor on the offense for half the season that he was sort of thrust into more of a playmaking role. I think we see him get back to 12 3-point attempts per 36 minutes, kind of in that range.
That'd be good.
Per 36 minutes is not the same as per game. Just as a clarification on what that stat is. But my thing here is they need to be a top 5 seed. They need to be a top 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. That to me is the minimum. I think if everybody's healthy relatively, I think your top 4 in whatever order are going to be Boston, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and the Knicks. I think those will be the top 4 teams in wins in some order. You have another sort of tier here of the Pacers, the Cavs, the Orlando Magic, and the Miami Heat. And I think that the Heat need to emerge from that group as the better team into a tier unto themselves, or maybe even get into that top tier that we were talking about, or the second tier behind Boston, I guess. But they need to emerge out of that pack and as the superior team, in part because if you're that you just want to be a better team. And then the other part of that too is you don't want to draw like the Boston Celtics again in the first round. Eric Spoelstra said, we weren't ready to meet the Celtics in the first round last year. Make it easy for yourselves, right? We don't need to wear this play-in tournament badge of honor crap anymore. Just do the thing that good NBA teams do and win regular season games, get into the playoffs, get a home court in the first round, perhaps. Whatever it is, but make it easier for yourself. Don't take on. You can't rely on the Milwaukee Bucks crumbling, right? Or a Giannis injury anymore. Like, you can't do that stuff. You got to make it easier for yourself. And part of that is getting out of the play-in tournament, but also dodging the best teams in the first round and working your way into being able to play those teams. If you're not going to be that team that, sprints out to the number 1 seed, which I don't think this Heat team will.
Yeah. I know it's kind of a larger umbrella under which so much can fall, but neither of us picked like the idea of being healthy as a reason why this team could be a contender. But I think it kind of ties in to what you're talking about.
Like an assumption, though, isn't it? Like the injured team isn't going to
stay healthy,
contend. Like we could say that about all 30 teams. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, I think it ties a lot to what you're saying. Like if they can be healthy, like I think, and this isn't like a huge expectation. Like, I mean, title contention might be a big thing, but even just the idea, like you have to be a top 5 team in the East. If this team is healthy, I think it's within their grasp. Again, it's going to take some incremental growth from everybody on the roster. I mean, but part of that comes with consistency. Part of that comes with having a consistent lineup, a tweak in the offense, an evolution here, a change in the rotation there, and players kind of stepping up and being more productive. But if they're healthy, I think that's also a huge part of it.
There were only 3 games out of a top 5 seed last year.
We all kind of forget that. Yeah. It felt
it's so bunched up in that little area in the East.
Yeah. And it just felt like a repeat of the season before, where it's like, oh, here we go again. They lost a couple key games, and then the injuries start piling up. It's like, oh, geez. And then all of a sudden, of course, they have, they lost Jimmy Butler, they lost Terry Rozier, they kind of just limped their way into the postseason, and it was like, the team was disastrous, but they weren't quite that bad. It was a lot more even than a lot of people care to remember.
Limping is even putting it generously. Like they were like
wheeled in maybe on a gurney.
Wheeled into the playoffs. Yeah, they were like in a stretcher into the playoffs, airdropped maybe. Who are the 2 players who need to take a leap for the Heat to get back to title contention next season? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Did you see anything interesting over the weekend in terms of the NFL? Like, it feels like it's still kind of getting its footing after week 2, but
it does feel that way. Chiefs Bengals, the end of that was great. We got a couple of 0-2 teams. It might be time to start like the Ravens and the Bengals. You had some teams that are struggling a little bit, but they're way better than their record. Might be time to make up some money on those ends.
All right. Well, if you want an opportunity to watch more NFL football, well, we've got something a little different for you, because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5, just $5, and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon at a market game, and all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. So visit FanDuel.com today and download America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you also follow us on your favorite podcast app. All right, let's hit the next ones. What's next on your list?
This one's kind of a reach a little bit, but I think it represents perhaps the more optimistic percentage of the fan base, and that's for Kal'el Ware to come to this roster and immediately have an impact. And I'm not saying that it's not possible. You and I have both talked about it. I think over the years, we've rarely seen a rookie come in and be immediately impactful on a good team, especially one that's already got a clear hierarchy. Jaime, I think, was an aberration last year. And even then, he was more of a stopgap kind of player because his game is, again, so similar to Jimmy Butler, and he was very exciting and fun, and he still had his peaks and valleys throughout the course of the season.
He's also 3 years older than Kal'el Ware when he was coming in.
Absolutely. But for Ware, I think the expectation is that he's going to be some kind of, I don't know, like a defense-altering savant where he's just going to come in and swat shots left and right and pull down rebounds and just affect
hit threes,
runs to
like
the
a
rim.
Karl Anthony Towns rate or whatever. Yeah, I mean, we got Heat fans penciling him into the starting lineup right away, which it could happen. Not going to rule anything out, but it's very high expectations, in other words.
So I don't know that he can meet those. I don't think that's possible. But just to come in here and be an impactful player, and I know we've made the comp before. Maybe it's a little too easy just because we saw it last year. But Derek Lively going into Dallas and being a really solid, impactful player, providing a spark, certainly helps when you have Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, on that roster, not to mention other key acquisitions at the trade deadline, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, like those. I mean, that was a big part of it. And even just removing Tim Hardaway Jr. from the equation, I think certainly helped Dallas, addition by subtraction. But for Miami, if you can get Ware to block a couple shots on per game or come close to, maybe not full 2 per game, because I don't know if he'll get those kind of minutes, be a more active rebounder. And then, pepper in a couple threes here and there. I think Miami's chances of title contention become increasingly high.
So the way I'm thinking about the prompt for this show is what has to happen for the Heat to return to title contention. Do you think that this has to happen? Do you think that there's a world where the Heat can return to title contention and Kal'el Ware isn't giving you a good 10 to 15 minutes per game?
Yeah, I do, because we've seen it over the last couple of seasons. But I also think you have to try to do something differently than you have. You can't just rely on the same things. And totally relying on an undersized team has just been such a problem because it leads to players breaking down at key moments, especially in the postseason, and you want to avoid that as much as possible.
And Kevin Love, another year older. He was Bam's primary backup last year. Thomas Bryant is back. Maybe he's better in year 2 than he was in his first year in Miami. But Kevin Love has been great for the Heat in the regular season the last year and a half. Had his moments in the playoffs, but has mostly been unplayable in the postseason. And so when I think about Kal'el Ware, maybe this is more of a playoff conversation than it is a regular season conversation. And maybe by the obviously not ready. Not obviously. More likely than not, I don't think he's ready right now. But give him a few months, just the way Derek Lively did. Give him a few months. Derek Lively was a different player by the end of the season. By the finals, like, you couldn't even call him a rookie anymore. That guy had been through a lot of stuff, and he was a lot better of a player than when the season started. And so maybe that if Kal'el Ware can take that kind of growth and he can make that kind of growth even as a rookie, maybe he can help propel the Heat during the playoffs when they do need that different element. I think it's a great call by you. In terms of guys maybe making a leap, so I did this. I do this. I was doing this exercise. I was trying to rank the top 100 players in the NBA. I didn't have anybody on the Heat's roster outside of Jimmy and Bam in my top 90.
Yeah.
I don't think that is a viable title contending roster.
No, it's not.
I think I think they have a lot of guys between 90 and 120, 90 and 115. If I were to go that far. But
Tyler, Terry,
roster,
Jaime,
and they've got
like all three of them kind of fit in there, right? I think
Tyler, Terry, and Jaime are all sort of in that 90 to 120 range. Nobody is in the top. I mean, I've got I don't have the list in front of me, but like Jimmy, Bam, all like top. I got them like in the top 25, top 30, whatever it is, in some place. But they need one of these guys, I think, to get into a top 60 territory. And that's a huge leap for the record. Like for Jaime to be one of the best 60 players in the league next year, or Tyler Herro, or Terry Rozier to have his best season in several seasons, or something. Those to me, I guess, would be like the sort of the contenders, the prospects. But it feels like one of those guys just has to emerge as a game-changing, like needle-moving type of player. Because The top 60 doesn't sound like those are like the Derek Whites of the world, the Drew Holidays, right? Like if you can find one of those kinds of guys who just moves the needle, doesn't have to be a 28 point per game score, but you know what I'm talking about? I need one of these guys to be one of those guys.
High level role players, like high level.
That's
elite
literally
role
how I
players.
have it labeled. I have high level role players. That's sort of, I kind of also have it in tiers, and those are those guys.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I think Kyle Lowry was somewhere in that vicinity because I think it was coming off of his first season. Yeah. Coming off his first season in Miami, they won a lot of games. They won the Eastern Conference, at least during the regular season. They had a nice deep playoff run. So it was, you know what, you saw vintage Kyle Lowry. Like, you know, he wasn't putting up monster numbers, but that's never really been the strength of his game. But in terms of being able to lead this group and organize things, and you saw that when he was on the court and off the court, particularly that first season, where it was just he was igniting the offense and providing a spark in a way that nobody else in the roster was capable of.
And he was making an impact on both sides of the ball too.
Yeah, drawing charges, etc. You know, forcing steals, turnovers. Yeah, no doubt. Getting to the line, drifting, whatever. Yeah, nobody. It's a far cry for Tyler in particular, because I think he has the potential, but I think the last postseason certainly didn't do him any favors, and I think there's kind of like some Tyler Herro fatigue around the NBA, because it's like here we are, year 5 now of Tyler Herro, and 6? Is this going into his 6th season? Is he going into his 6th season?
It's going into his 6th season, yeah.
So
and his archetype, there's not a whole lot of guys in the Tyler Herro archetype, the scoring guard, who isn't like this big guy or this extreme athlete or whatever, that are in the top 60. Like there's not a lot of versions of Tyler Herro in the top 60, right? I even have CJ McCollum a little bit outside the top 60. And so it's tough for a player like that to do it, which is why we want him shooting more threes and to be more of maybe that efficient type of scorer as opposed to that kind of scoring guard, microwave kind of guy. My last thing, and I know we didn't have this, but you mentioned Bam earlier, and I sort of teased this. You said like 6 assists or something. I have him at 4+ assists. I just need more Bam playmaking, and it kind of goes hand in hand. I probably should have just said it when you had Bam up, but if he's averaging 4 more assists, that to me, I think he might be more perimeter based, which I think Bam needs to get back to some of the dribble handoff stuff. I think the Heat's offense needs to get back to more of some of that Bam dribble handoff stuff, that side to side free flowing offense, read and react kind of thing, to be a little bit less predictable, generate more threes with Bam setting those screens out on the perimeter. And if he can kind of get back to 4+ assists, 5 would be even better, obviously. I think that would go a long way. And it's less indicative of Bam getting better and more indicative of Miami's offense being more efficient. And that's kind of where I want it to be. All right. Anything else before we sign off quickly?
No, that's basically it.
Great. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.